Cake break. You get your sugar. So the next talk will be Adaptation, Performance, and Host Resistance, Tsuga Species, Research in the Northeast, by Rick Harper from the University of Massachusetts Department of Environmental Conservation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. How's everybody doing? Good? Good to be here. I don't want to take too long. I'm standing in the way of your cake. That would not be a good scene, would it? No. Okay. You're not supposed to agree too loudly. However, I'm a Canadian, very uptight. My wife says Americans are a little more verbose and that sort of thing, so I guess agreeing is okay. It's okay. So let's move forward here and talk a little bit about our hemlock research here in the Northeast, and I'll put my contact information up at the end. I'm always happy to chat with folks and discuss our areas of interest. It's great to be here to talk about plants, isn't it? Yeah. I think it's kind of a fun thing, and hopefully not too much text is being cut off in the switch from a Mac to a PC. So the conversation starts, but certainly does not end with eastern hemlock, with our Tsuga canadensis. And I'd just like to say first and foremost, my area of research has not been in sort of the forest ecology world, if you will, of our hemlocks, and you quickly get into that. In fact, I think probably most of the discussion has either been in that, or it's been, of course, in the invasive insect world, in the world of hemlock-related algae, even to a degree, elongate hemlock scale. And of course, some of those factors drive some of the research that we've been doing for the last 10 plus years. But I kind of operate in sort of a little bit of a distinct world, and that's the world of the ornamentals. And that's because not only, of course, do we value trees like our hemlock species as a climax species, as a keystone or a foundation species in sort of this forest ecology world, but we do value it as well in the ornamental world. And that's where over 90% of us live, right? 91.4% of the population of Massachusetts lives in an urban area. And so we love the benefits that come from trees like our hemlocks and that sort of thing for, obviously, their beauty, their year-round foliage. And this is sort of part of a bit of a larger research context that we've got going on in the Department of Environmental Conservation. That really relates to conifers in the urban environment, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But this is actually our grad student that just finished last year, Casey Clapp. And of course, if anybody's in that state as a grad student, the best thing you can do for your advisor is to publish your work. So we can actually take a look at Casey's work, because he did indeed do that, which is helpful for everybody. So, as I'm saying, the benefits of our conifers are derived year-round, and that relates to things like absorption, interception of pollutants, of rainfall. Their aesthetic benefits are derived for 12 months of the year. They provide thermal buffering and privacy screening, again, 12 months of the year. And of course, we have some of these particulars right here that the literature tells us that they're known to intercept 50% more rainwater than our deciduous plants. That makes sense, because our deciduous plants don't have leaves for approximately half the year. They're an important source of wildlife habitat, an important source certainly in the built environment as it relates to building heating efficiency and helping to increase that. And this is a huge area that I'm very interested in. This is this issue of diversity deficit. We have about 1.2 million street trees in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. 50% of those trees are maple, and 65% of those trees are basically maple or oak. So we know, as plant people, the problem we get into when we don't have a whole lot of diversity. And again, we look at establishing conifers in some of these settings because they are so few. This is just some information from some street tree inventories from Portland, from Berkeley, from Minneapolis. You can see that the number of conifers that they have are very much in the single digits, in some cases even less than 1%. They're not even listed in the top 25 species of the street tree list of Boston. So that's kind of the area that I come at. I come at it from a little bit of a different angle, but you can read Casey's work in a journal known as the Arboricultural Journal. This is a professional journal. It is reviewed by scientists, but it's read by actually the members of the Arboricultural Association over in the UK. So many of you may not be familiar with the journal, but you can log on, and I'm happy to send you a PDF of his great synthesis work. Okay, so to sort of set the stage, like I said, we can't at least completely not talk about this insect, although this particular insect is not an area of research of mine, but we think of people like Van Drysch and Elkington in our department, people that are in sort of the Hall of Fame, if you will, as it relates to biocontrols and insect management and that sort of thing. And they've done, of course, a lot of work on management of these important invasives. And of course, we know, just very, very quickly here, that hemlock woolly algae is a tiny insect, you know, 1.5 millimeters or so in length. You think of the width of your fingernails being approximately 1 millimeter. They were, of course, found in 1951 in a private plant collection in Richmond, Virginia, and then of course proceeded to really travel throughout the rest of the eastern states in the ensuing decades. And so we have the first find in New York and New England in 1985. And of course we know the mortality that relates to having successful infestations from hemlock woolly adelgid. And this is one stat that I pulled from one of the proceedings of one of the hemlock symposiums. That this small insect is successful for the elimination of 60% of the native hemlock trees in New Jersey alone, in that state alone. And this is actually the formal find on Long Island. This is from Tom Kowalczyk. Tom's the diagnostician at one of Cornell University's extension labs out in Riverhead. And he said here, this is to Carolyn Class, and this is dated, she received this on December 4th, 1985. Carolyn, these appear to be adelgids. I thought it may be significant since they're on hemlock. And indeed they are significant, right? As I said before, eliminating 60% of hemlock trees in the state of New Jersey. This is a nice close-up of a hemlock woolly adelgid through scanning electron microscope. And of course here we see the successful infestation of the range of our eastern hemlock. Approximately 50% or so of the range is being infested with woolly adelgid. And so since we were sort of in the thick of things, I worked for 12 years. So I came to the United States, worked for the ornamentals industry, and then spent nearly 12 years working at one of Cornell University's extension offices just north of the city. So we were sort of right in the thick of it in Westchester County in terms of being in an infested area. And this is when we're actually planting these trees, September 30th, 2003. And so we established 140 trees, 7 different species of hemlocks over 3 different plots. I have a nice aerial shot of this as well. And basically our objectives were to determine which of these species were adaptable to the northeast, and of course which species would display a natural host resistance to hemlock woolly adelgid. In 2001, the literature was quite scattered. There wasn't really a whole lot in terms of information, sorry, 2003. So those early 2000s, there really wasn't a whole lot of definitive information as to what's resistant, what's not. You know, McClure had done some great work with the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station, Rich Coles, Carol Shea, those folks. And so it's kind of a case of cobbling things together, some work that had been started at Penn State as well. So we were sort of part of this kind of a little bit more, I think, a little bit more extensive effort of getting some work off the ground. And so we knew that this was going to be a multi-year effort, and we inoculated our trees. We wanted to make sure we had them successfully infested with hemlock woolly adelgid. We did that just before egg hatch in April, and we did that spring 2004, 2005, 2006. And like I said, we did that 3 times just to make sure we had viable populations on our trees. As we know, once we start to research things, things are often less than ideal, right? The population that we inoculated with in 2004, we had some questions about the viability. Then, of course, the winter of 2004, 2005 was a really difficult winter. You do see knockback of hemlock woolly adelgid if winter temperatures are cold enough for long enough. In my opinion, we did not see the duration of winter temperatures that we needed to this year to kill back as many of the woolly adelgid as we had hoped. Certainly there has been some dieback, but not to the degree that we had hoped. So like I said, we did this for 3 years, and here we are simply putting an infested twig on with some twist ties. And this is just a histogram here. I only have 5 charts, and this is the first one, just to talk a little bit about initial tree height. So we had a bit of a challenge in terms of actually finding some of these 7 species that we wanted to establish. Because woolly adelgid was well established along the eastern seaboard, producers no longer produced woolly hemlock trees to the degree that they used to. So we didn't want to sort of be getting trees from different parts of the country. We were able to cobble together our sources of trees from 2 different nurseries in the Pacific Northwest, believe it or not. So we got a little bit of variation in some of the species. Some we were happy with, some we were not. But this is actually, again, this plot down by the front gate. And the 7 species were 2 species from eastern North America, of course, our Canadensis and our Caroliniana. 2 species from the western part of the country, western hemlock, Tsuga heterophylla and Tsuga mertensiana, and then 3 species from Asia, Chinese hemlock, chinensis, Japanese hemlock sieboldii, and then diversifolia, our northern Japanese hemlock. And so these are the 7 species that we were interested in trying to grow, to see how they would do here in the Northeast, and to see how resistant they perhaps were to woolly adelgid. We established these at a place called Laston Park and Arboretum. This is just north of New York City in sort of the Katona-Somers, Yorktown area, just off of 684 and Route 35. It's the location where The Secret of My Success, a film in the 1980s, was filmed. Bad film by a Canadian named Michael J. Fox. I don't recommend you watch the film. But just to give you a little bit of context, this is where the location was actually. We were able to get our research plots in here, which was fantastic in one important sense, because this is the front gate plot that I've been mentioning, because of course this was all protected by deer fence. And so when you have deer populations like we do in eastern Mass, informally estimated at being around 90 to 100 per square mile, you need deer protection when you're going to be putting down something like, well, putting down virtually anything, right? We've seen them eating barberry and juniper and holly and those sorts of things when they get that dense enough. So, what did we find? This is based on our field work from 2008 in terms of our infestation by hemlock woolly adelgid. Well, the nice thing is we start to look at the information after 4 years, for 4 successful growing seasons. And, you know, Tsuga chinensis quickly stands out, Mertensiana stands out. We don't really see a whole lot of infestation on them at all. In fact, virtually no infestation on the chinensis. And so, of course, we think about canadensis here, and we do see some infestation, and that's certainly no surprise, as well as our caroliniana as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. We also, in terms of looking at tree adaptability, we looked at tree height and we looked at tree vigor. So pretty straightforward measurements. In terms of tree vigor, we simply gave it a 0 to 5 ocular rating. In other words, if the foliage looked nice and green, the tree looked like it was growing well. In terms of the color of the plant, then that got something like, you know, upwards of a 5. But if it looked real, if it looked, you know, like it had been burnt or there was some dieback or something like that, that affected that rating. And then, of course, tree height. So to no surprise, you think of things like our canadensis doing quite well here. We also saw some real good growth from our chinensis. And, you know, it seemed like, we'll talk a little bit more about heterophylla. So we had some mixed results with that particular tree, but certainly canadensis and chinensis were quick to stand out. And so this is actually from some follow-up field data that we collected in 2012. So the publication is just being accepted last month, so that'll be coming out in 2016. But basically, you can see from the field data right here how well these trees have been growing. And of course, one of the trees that stands out here is heterophylla, one of our western species, our western hemlock. And so you think, well, then that's great, it's doing well. You know, how is it doing in terms of other things, its resistance to woolly adelgid? Well, the big limiting factor with something like heterophylla was this problem right here. Of course, you can see this is winter injury. So every spring, our heterophylla looked in real rough shape. And you can run into this with certainly your evergreen trees. And we kind of classify winter injury into 2 particular segments. We classify winter injury into acute freeze-thaw injury, and we classify winter injury into sort of this chronic drying, if you will. And so what we didn't see was actually our survivorship. So we've got only basically about 30% of our heterophylla left. That's basically what we have left. And so here's the plot in 2004, that same plot in 2007 at the front gate, and that same plot in 2013. You can read about our initial paper if you wish. This is our Arboriculture and Urban Forestry. It goes out to 22,000 members of the International Society of Arboriculture. So it's certainly got some nice readership, which is what I'm really interested in. Half my position is to do extension and outreach to professionals, so that's really helpful. So go to that site if you wanted to see that. This is elongate hemlock scale. So no story is any story without a but or a however. So this insect sort of came on with a vengeance, and so we actually, while we were doing our field surveys in 2008, we saw some real significant, real extensive infestation by elongate hemlock scale. And sort of the updated numbers can be really simplified. We basically got about 100% infestation throughout all of the hemlock trees now at these plots. So that's obviously not something that we were hoping for. And so what we did was we actually treated them with, this is horticultural oil, something that you commonly spray in the landscape. It's a reduced risk pesticide. And we had actually heard some rumors from some of the arboretums that there was some phytotoxicity as it relates to horticultural oil on some of these hemlocks. We tried a particular on Chinese hemlock. We did not see any injury on this tree. So we actually published this negative data, which was a lot of fun, and we determined that horticultural oil is in fact compatible with an integrated pest management program. Here's some of the branches of our Tsuga chinensis right after the treatment, post 1% and 2% horticultural oil. So you can read about this in the 2013 Arboriculture Urban Forestry. This came out. And if you want any of these PDFs, I'm happy to send this to you. And so last, as I kind of wrap up here, the other thing, of course, that we're interested in sort of inherently, because we're dealing with ornamentals, is the appearance of trees. And so we actually gathered some horticulturists and some arborists, and we actually did work with a social scientist in Canada, and we actually looked at purchase preferences, comparing Tsuga chinensis and Tsuga canadensis. So there was no statistical significance in terms of the differences between the two trees. People found them to be similar enough that they really didn't care in terms of purchase preference. They could tell that there was a difference, and of course the big thing that people wanted were something that was insecticide, that they didn't need to apply insecticides to. And again, you can read that publication as well. And so in our upcoming publication, we're actually looking a little bit at the vegetative propagation of Tsuga chinensis. This is from our greenhouse at the College of Natural Sciences in UMass Amherst, and like I said, that was accepted last month. So I'm fortunate because I teach, I get people that actually pay to come and work for me. They're called students, and so here they are actually helping us with some of our cuttings, and here they are helping us clean some seed, which is great. We try to make it a lot of fun. So really, to wrap up here, I have 2 more slides just to wrap up here. Our research objectives in terms of understanding resistance to hemlock woolly adelgid and response to northeast growing conditions, as well as looking at some of the visual dimensions. We've really very much focused on Tsuga chinensis just as a result of our observations as it relates to our particular research. And so future research questions come from our stakeholders, because I have an outreach appointment, so I work with the tree wardens and arborist professionals here in Massachusetts, in addition to teaching, having a research appointment, modest teaching and research appointment. So people, of course, want to know things like, do deer browse on Tsuga chinensis? What's its response to shearing, response to landscape conditions? So we've answered lots of these key questions, but certainly there are some exciting discoveries ahead. This is actually industry just north of New York City. So thanks to everyone involved, and if anybody wants to contact me, this is my email address right here. I certainly welcome people stopping by and saying hello and dropping me an email or even giving me a call. So thank you, and please let me know if you have any time for maybe a question. So I have 3:48. Or do you want to get to your cake? Yes?
Just wondering, there are survivors in natural hemlock stands, and I'm just wondering, I believe someone presented at the Northeast Natural History Conference that there are some native genotypes that have some sort of hemlock woolly adelgid resistance mechanism.
Yeah, was that Casagrande? Is that Richard Casagrande from URI?
It might have been.
Yeah, we've done some collecting for him, and so that's obviously, I mean, my understanding is it's less than 1%, but that is certainly something to be look into as well.
Okay, and then the second question with the chinensis, I know some of the Tsuga species hybridize. I'm just wondering if chinensis is what I believe they do, and would chinensis integress at all into our native Tsuga?
So that's a real good question. Chinensis is actually, so I'm not a geneticist, but chinensis is actually more genetically like Tsuga caroliniana than our eastern hemlock, than canadensis. So if there's any possibility, so my understanding of the limited work that's being done by Montgomery and a couple people from the Fed is that they really had a difficult time crossing chinensis. In fact, I don't think they could cross chinensis with canadensis. They were able to cross it successfully with caroliniana, and at least one of those western species. It might be mertensiana, off the top of my head. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
If there's a second adelgid-like pest that would infest chinensis, what would be the argument of using this as an alternative when you could wind up treating both Tsuga canadensis with an oil-based spray at 2% or whatever? What's the answer here?
Well, there is no, I mean, it's like everything, right? The environment isn't a computer program where we can take one line out and insert another line and have an entirely different program. We're all looking at this from a multi sort of approach. And the big thing that I deal with folks in communities and practitioners is they don't want to spray. They don't have to deal with insecticides. So this provides an alternative to something like that. If we have an invasion from some other insect that is susceptible to, I mean, that's a great point. The resistance mechanism, I believe, and I've read just from one paper that's in a proceedings from one of the hemlock woolly adelgid conferences, is that it's perhaps mechanical in nature. In other words, the plant simply, the cuticle of the plant is simply too thick to be penetrated by the proboscis of the adelgid. So is that the case with other types of adelgids? I don't know. We know that our genotype of the adelgid is from southern Japan, so there's no geographic relationship from the adelgid we deal with in Tsuga chinensis. Yes?
Are there examples of chinensis in North America that go reproductive? I know the Arnold Arboretum has had a specimen for quite a long time.
That's right, since 1911.
Usually a little young. But do they become reproductive, and if so, is there a possibility of naturalization?
Oh, excellent question. Excellent. I actually printed off what people consider an invasive plant from Massachusetts Invasive Plant Advisory Group. We could chat more afterwards if you want. So, I've never actually met Peter Del Tredici, but he's been very helpful over the years because our area of ornamentals, there's just not a whole lot of work that's going on. Like I said, the forest ecology, the insect ecology, lots of work going on there, and not a whole lot going on in the ornamental sector. So we've chatted about the trees, and I've been out to see them and on Hemlock Hill that have been there since 1911. They were, of course, were brought over by E.H. Wilson, but they call him China Wilson, I guess. And there's been no evidence of them being invasive from that locale. But you know, there's a 2008 article from Havel and Montgomery from the Arnold Journal, and they talk about the value of arboreta in studying things like hemlock. And that's another example, is that it's great to have these little areas where you can sort of play around with plants. And that sort of speaks to the benefit of a place like the Arnold Arboretum.
I forgot whether Peter reported, do they produce cones?
They do, yeah. We had the students, they were actually cleaning Tsuga chinensis cones
from
this year.
From the Arboretum.
Yeah, so we had some when Sandy ripped through and of course devastated the New York metro area a couple of years ago. We all remember the sudden change in forest cover around the magnolia plot, which is where the Elizabeth magnolia was invented at Lasson Park. That sudden change caused some of the trees to produce seed. You know that whenever plants sometimes get stressed, they'll sometimes produce a lot of seed. So I was just down there in one of my visitations and did a big collection. So that's what we had the students clean.
So I got a couple pounds from China.
Yeah, right.
Very good.
Exactly.
Great.
Okay,
Okay, thanks everybody.